Hello everybody, I'm Delegate Plum. Welcome to our show, Virginia Report. Tonight we're going to talk about two subjects of interest to me. On the one hand, the education of children. On the other hand, energy and conservation, sustainability, all those factors together. You might say we're going to get two birds with one stone, but actually we're going to get three birds with one stone because we're going to talk to the founder and director of the Three Birds Foundation, Joe Plummer. Joe, welcome.
Thank you.
Three Birds Foundation. Tell me what that name's all about.
So the idea behind Three Birds is that we're addressing three issues simultaneously. We're addressing issues related to education, the environment, and economic issues simultaneously using renewable energy.
So the common factor of the stone, so to speak, is the renewable energy piece?
Absolutely, yes.
And where did an idea like this come from?
Well, it started when I saw a project in Herndon, Virginia go through the whole process. Rachel Carson Middle School did a renewable energy project. They started with a grant opportunity and had the kids apply to the grant. The kids got really excited about it and basically took the entire project and ran with it. And they ended up raising $40,000 for a 2.6 kilowatt system on their roof. They now have a data monitoring system in the classroom on their website. They had a flip the switch event, and the installation was highlighted in local publications. So it was a huge success. So the question was, how do we replicate this and how do we do this on a larger scale? And so what we've been trying to do is work with schools to build momentum around these ideas so that we can do more installations.
And Joe, Rachel Carson Middle School, of course, is just right next door in Herndon, or a Herndon address, I would guess you would say. Mm-hmm. But your focus is on Herndon-Reston area.
Absolutely. So we're actually focusing on low-income schools in the Fairfax County region. So we've been working with Dogwood and Hutchinson and a few others to really get momentum behind these ideas. A lot of schools have done gardening and recycling initiatives, and so they're wondering what the next step is, what's the next big thing they can do. And for a lot of them, they're thinking renewable energy. They're thinking they can take on a significant project and try to get the kids excited about it.
How does a foundation fit into all this, using a foundation structure?
Yeah, so I think our teachers are the most hardworking people we have, and they spend a lot of hours educating our kids, and when it comes to extracurricular activities, they don't have a lot of time and they don't have a lot of bandwidth. So if we can give them volunteers and support and help with things like grant writing assistance, it can be huge in terms of actually building momentum. So a project that might take 3 or 4 years to get done with an hour a day on their part might take 1 or 2 with us putting in time and helping them find the money and build support.
Sure. Now, how do you come to this? Do you come from the education piece, or do you come from the renewable energy side, or both?
Probably both. I come from a family of educators, and I've always been interested in engineering and architecture, so I think the sustainability piece has always interested me, but the education space is something I've always been plugged into and always been attuned to.
And do you have experience teaching, or was your work, again, on the energy side?
My work was on kind of economics and engineering side. I don't have experience teaching, so there's definitely an interesting learning curve there.
Yeah.
But that's something that the schools are very aware of, and they like seeing engineers out in the world trying to help them and get kids interested in science. And there's a huge movement right now around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, to really get kids interested in these subjects because there's a huge need for it.
And certainly, as you say, that part of the emphasis has been in the classroom is to try to get some people from the world of work experience to come into the classroom. So having an engineering background would give you some authentication with the teachers and students about what you're dealing with.
Absolutely. It also gives you a great deal of respect for teachers and how hard their job is. It's very hard to communicate with kids who learn in a lot of different ways, and it's a very creative job, I think, because teachers are constantly improvising and trying to figure out ways to reach kids at a different level.
Were you were you a part of the Rachel Carson Middle School experience?
I worked with them on the grant, but we didn't have the nonprofit set up at the time, so it was kind of the first experience I had with the process.
Sure. And do you have any information as to what was the spark for that one? I mean, Rachel Carson, with the name of a school like that,
Right.
has to give you some direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rachel Carson Middle School has identity, right? So their identity is Rachel Carson, who's the famous conservationist. They also have a great champion in one of their science teachers, Kirk Treacle. So identity, champion, and then they were able to find a lot of grant funding to really, build momentum and keep the momentum going. They could have easily decided to do the project and then it fallen through on the first grant, but they kept winning and it just kept building up. So identity, champions, money, and momentum. That's what we think the key recipe is. So if we can help schools develop identity around these, build champions in their teachers and their principals, find money, and continue to build momentum, we can get a lot of success.
Identity in this instance is identity for the school. Talk a little more about what identity means when you say it in this regard.
Yeah, so when we're talking about identity, we're talking about how students perceive themselves or how communities perceive themselves.
Okay.
So, for example, at Rachel Carson Middle School, there are a lot of students that are interested in environmental and sustainability issues. And part of that is because they learn so much about it because their school is named after a famous conservationist.
Right.
It's similar to schools that have a lot of identity around writing when their school is named after a famous writer. But this is really powerful, and that's not to say that we should name every school after famous conservationists, but focusing on identity, I think, could be really powerful. If we can create these sustainability natives, as the Center for Green Schools calls them, we can really build momentum around some of these ideas.
And this is not an isolated effort. As you say, the Center for Green Schools and a number of other efforts in Fairfax County Schools has an outdoor education initiative underway. A lot of people are trying to work at this.
Yeah. Elaine Tholen is one of the champions in the Fairfax County public school system around outdoor education, and I think if we can start to connect the dots around all of these different environmental and sustainable pieces, we can really see kind of a process develop of how schools start from more or less nothing and become these robust, green, sustainable schools. I think the students could lead the effort. I think the way that we're doing things is we're involving students in every step along the process. So I think that could be really powerful.
And so part of the identity for the students become that we are in a green school, and hence we, in our behaviors and what we do and don't do related to that is part of it.
Right, and then it's also that they're leaving a legacy for generations to come. They say, they can go back to their school and say, I built that. I helped make this school the way it is today.
Well, in the case of Rachel Carson, we weren't talking about a couple of one-day experiments in the classroom or in the laboratory. We're talking about a solar installation on the roof.
Right.
And it stays after you leave Rachel Carson
Absolutely.
School.
Yeah.
It's still making juice.
Right. Yeah. And you can go onto their website right now and see how much energy it's producing.
Wow. And the energy flows into the school, into the grid, however that works.
Yeah. So if the system produces more than the school consumes, then the energy would flow back into the grid.
Right. Grants in that instance came from government, foundations, corporations?
So they came from a mix of corporations and nonprofit foundations. So the first grant that they won was from Dominion, from their K-12 partnership program. And this is a program where they award up to $10,000 for anything related to energy or environmental education. And this was actually a grant that was won by Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology for the same purpose, to do a solar installation. So we're thinking with grant programs like this, we could really start to replicate the process and solidify the funding source, which is huge, because if you can streamline that process, then you know exactly what to do, and schools know where to go for the funding, and it becomes much easier.
What's next on the landing strip? What are you going to take off with in terms of projects? Do you have anything queued up right now, or are you still in the planning stage?
Well, I think Hutchison is the next one that's going to be ready for an actual installation. They're gearing up pretty quickly. They have a great partner in Time Warner Cable. There are a lot of schools getting excited about this. We think that if we can create enough momentum, enough grassroots momentum, we can go to the school district and Dominion with a larger level of interest and say, could we do a larger set of projects all at once as opposed to piecing these together over a longer period of time. And this would mean larger installations, more savings, more panels. The systems would be larger, and it would be really a lot more educational value for the students. So those we think would be the ideal, but those are very difficult systems to put in place.
Sure. What does Three Birds Foundation bring to that process? For example, at Hutchison, what role do you play at Hutchison?
So we're kind of the facilitator, the conversation leader, and we're guiding all of these conversations towards renewable energy. So we've worked with them on their sustainability initiatives around gardening and recycling and stuff like this. They've done a lot of things, including a great event this past fall where they collected 10 pallets of electronics for recycling, which is just amazing. But we're really there to inform them about how do they get things like solar installations, solar demos, those kinds of things in the classroom or on their roof. And there are a lot of opportunities throughout the country to find really innovative ways to engage students in the science classroom around renewable energy. So if we can just be a constant voice for that, we show up to all the green meetings, we talk to them about these opportunities, and we're also always talking to them about grant opportunities, helping them with grant writing assistance, and that's really valuable to teachers and principals.
I always have trouble keeping in mind when we talk about solar collectors, how big a collector has to be to, for example, power my house. And, for example, you brought a collector along today. What potential does it have?
Yeah, so this is a solar panel, and it uses sunlight to produce electricity, which is pretty awesome. This is just a 10-watt panel, so this wouldn't power much. You think the CFLs the normal CFL is 60 watts, normal incandescent is 100 watts. And
sure.
So this really wouldn't power much, but you can hook these up to batteries and then you have a lot more potential.
Sure.
Now for the average home in the area, it's about 5 to 6 kilowatts. So this is 10 watts, so 1,000 watts is a kilowatt, so you're talking about a lot of these. So generally it's not, but on schools have large flat roofs.
Sure.
They have a lot of sunlight during the day. They're huge energy consumers, so it makes a lot of sense to at least consider these for their economic value. And really, we're arguing for the educational and inspirational value of these things, and especially the process. The process is so engaging to students. I think it's something that students can really get excited about.
The process, it goes from idea and conception to implementation. But that process is applicable whatever the issue might be.
Right.
You happen to apply it in solar, but you can apply it to any kind of problem solving, presumably.
Absolutely. I think this is something that we're discovering is this could be a model that could translate to anything, really. If you can engage students around something that will change their community and they have a stake in creating it and then they leave a legacy behind, I think that's huge in creating identity and getting them engaged in a particular subject. So if you wanted to get them engaged in road design, if they were to design the road outside the school or design a bridge outside their school and then it's there for forever, you'll have 100 transportation engineers come out of that class. So I think we could think about this in multiple contexts and use this kind of vehicle of engaging students behind real projects, and I think it has some weight.
We have spent a lot of time talking about solar, but of course it's but one of multiple undertakings. You mentioned also community gardening, which has gotten to be big in the community at large, as well as, for example, recycling. Could you talk a little more about what some other things might be that are potential for student projects, again recognizing that one of the objectives of this is to get students interested in the science, the technology, engineering, math at the same time.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of, so the National Wildlife Federation has a great Eco Schools program which covers a lot of different kind of sustainability issues, the basics like recycling, gardening, energy auditing, those kinds of things. But now we're starting to see STEM and environmental issues start to come together. The Herndon High School Robotics Club built a great robot, and now the question is, can you take a robot and make it solar powered? Can you you know, take a rainwater harvesting system and have it irrigated through the garden and have that take care of your garden? So the questions are becoming more interesting and more complex, and I think as they become more interesting and more complex, the students get to be more creative, and it engages them more and more around the issues.
Sure. You are serving as facilitator, stimulator, idea generator, and so on for these kinds of projects. What about the broader community in terms of how you might engage people outside the school? When you engage, of course, Dominion, we're all not shareholders, but we are all contributors to Dominion as users of its electricity. But how can others help out in the community?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I think people really need to kind of take ownership of the answer. I think it's an opportunity to be creative. I think we've started to engage PTAs, and they've kind of reached out to their communities, and I think that's the beginning of the conversation. But I think when we have people who don't have students in the schools that are in their communities start to get involved, that's when we'll know we're really getting into the community. And I think that's something that communities can get very creative with, and I think they should.
Examples of how that involvement might be, if you're again focusing primarily on the students and using the community as support. I know, for example, with the robotics program, a lot of dads went in a lot of evenings and helped out, and moms too, I'm sure, helped out designing and building those things.
Yeah, so I think there's just as much of an opportunity for parents to get involved with these kinds of projects. There's a very real brainstorming process around these things, and kind of how you get these at the school is a very interesting process. Also, I think there's a next step after you do this project. So I mentioned, you know, these schools have done recycling, they've done gardening, so the next step is renewable energy. What's the next step after renewable energy? I think it's to go out into the community and do a project of a similar size. So if the school were to become the kind of the focal point of community conversations around sustainability, I think that would be amazing.
In the past, it seems to me, as I've observed these things happening in the schools, too many times they were club activities. In other words, there was something that happened after the school day.
Yeah.
Are we making progress, do you think, in terms of integrating within the regular school day and in the curriculum itself these topics of renewable energy and this process of problem solving and the interest in STEM? Is all that now, do you think, getting into the classroom itself?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, for example, I know there are a few schools in Herndon and Reston that have STEM labs now, so they'll have these kind of a little bit more informal but more hands-on experiences that students can get with science, technology, engineering, and math. And then also, I think, for example, the energy and sustainability concepts are much better integrated now into curriculum. One of the things we've found is we can go in two contexts. We can go in classroom context or after school context. With in-class context, we have to schedule and align well with the units, but it still works very well, and it's something that we think it could have a lot of potential. If we could come into every classroom talking about electricity and introduce renewable energy at the same time, then we've basically hooked an entire fourth grade class or whatever grade to the idea of doing an installation at their school. And those are significant numbers. That's hundreds of students.
Now, I know you haven't been around long enough to be talking about long-term evaluations and that sort of thing, but as you've looked at others who've undertaken efforts like this more hands-on discovery approach, a problem-solving approach, Does it show up in her in terms of how students perform, how students are motivated, how they might do on tests, and all the other things that we seem to put such emphasis on with education?
Yeah, so I think you have to be very rigorous when you look at that kind of data. You're definitely looking at longitudinal studies in order to figure that out. So you need to monitor students from an early age to even into college. And that's also what we're talking about when we talk about identity. There's no real way to measure identity unless you're following a student throughout their education. So if we can say, these students experienced renewable energy in first grade and these students didn't, and 100 of these students went and studied sustainability and only 20 of these did, then we could say, there's something happening around their identity.
Right.
But that's a very long study, and I don't think there's any significant funding or I don't think there are organizations that are actively seeking that data.
Sure.
Which I think is unfortunate, but it's understandable because there's more immediate data that you can get that would help you understand what you're doing and how well you're doing it.
In the short run, however, you have the anecdotal data from the teachers who say,
Right.
my kids are excited. They
Right.
come to school. They have trouble leaving the classroom.
Right.
All those kind of things about liking it.
And the people on the ground, you can see the kids' eyes light up, and especially when you develop, like we've developed some demonstrations with wind and solar where there's a lot of moving parts, and so when they see the wind producing energy, or they see a solar panel, powering a water pump or something, their eyes light up and they're asking questions, and you don't have to ask them the questions because they're asking the questions.
Sure.
And that's what we need to encourage, is them being curious, and I think the more we can do that, the better off we'll be.
Fairfax County has been a leader in the partnership arrangement between various business sectors and corporations and the schools. And I believe you mentioned maybe at Rachel Carson that partnership, or I guess at Hutchinson, the partnership with Time Warner will help to facilitate that. For those people who would be watching the show who might be involved in their corporate activities, interested in partnership arrangements like this, it seems like this would be a natural.
Absolutely. I think it starts with their volunteer programs. Time Warner Cable has put in a ton of employee volunteer hours, and then they've also contributed to some of the sustainability initiatives and STEM lab initiatives at the school. So I think the more people you can get excited around these ideas, the better. And also those four things that I mentioned: momentum, identity, champions, and money. I think those corporate partners can only help with. So I would encourage all those people to definitely get involved.
And let's face it, that in the professions of science, technology, engineering, math, you got a bunch of people who like to do some of this hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
Who had to go through the school curriculum and now want to experiment on their own. Well, this is a chance to do it with the kids, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this area, we've got plenty of people who are well versed in STEM and are really some of the best in the country, the best engineers, the best scientists. So if we can get them talking to our students in Fairfax County, we'll continue to improve our education system. So
that corporate involvement, on the one hand, sometimes involves actually a contribution of money. The corporation actually gives the school money for a project or whatever. But on the other hand, as we point out, it oftentimes involves our employees actually coming into the school, tutoring or teaching or demonstrating or whatever, and that's been a great help to schools as well, I know.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it also kind of solidifies that idea of the school being a focal point of the community.
Yeah, exactly.
If we can get businesses rallied around school efforts, I think we can see a lot of school identity and community identity building. And around sustainability, I think that could be really powerful.
For the viewers who are looking in and thinking, I want to be a part of this, Joe, how do they become a part?
I think they reach out to the community they identify with most and start asking questions. I think the thing that we did to start figuring out how to get involved is we went to schools in the area and we started asking questions. We said, what are you doing around STEM? What are you doing around the environment? What are you doing around sustainability? And then we were able to ask, have you ever considered doing a renewable energy project? And then we eventually got to the point where we said, how can we help?
Well, what happens if they go to 3birds.org, your website?
Yeah.
Are there opportunities there?
There are opportunities, and there will be more this fall. The academic year is kind of our prime time in terms of getting involved, so we'd love to have more people involved in our work.
And 3birds.org could talk to people about how to make that contact at that website?
Yes.
Okay. And that's everything, again, from direct contributions to actually being willing to participate as an involved person.
Yep.
Your future, you're working with Hutchison and Dogwood now. Any thoughts as to fall yet? How much further are you going to expand, or is that still in the planning stage?
So our goal by the end of the calendar year, we want to be working with 20 schools in the area, mostly elementary schools, but we'd like to really continue to build momentum. If we can build a lot of support for these ideas, we can start talking about larger sources of funding. We can start looking at funding outside the county from larger foundations and how we can really support these programs.
Great.
So I think the more we can build momentum, the better.
Joe Plummer, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to have to leave it there. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us as well. Renewable energy, it's a great subject for the kids to look into. They'll learn something useful in their future. They'll also get stimulated by potential study in science, technology, engineering, math. You hear the publicities I do all the time. We don't turn out nearly enough to serve our business and corporate needs, so we need to get more students interested. The other thing happens is it just gets kids motivated, makes them like to go to school and get involved. This is a way to do it. Remember that website, 3birds.org. You can become involved in this process as well. This is Delegate Ken Plum. Excuse me. I want to thank you for being with us tonight on Virginia Report, and I hope you'll join us next week at the same time. Good night.